So thanks for allowing me to participate in this. For any of you that were on the call a few weeks ago, I said that I am actually not a marketer, so wasn't sure I would belong in this forum. But so what I'm doing is I'm learning and listening from you all and bringing you my perspective, which is based on working at Microsoft for over 20 years. I've done 10 years in localization. I spent a few years, my first years actually were spent sort of in an on-the-ground job working with, as we developed out our subsidiaries in the AMI region, Africa, India, Middle East. And so, and then for the past 10 years, I've been in Trustworthy Computing, managing a team called Global Readiness. And I'll tell you a little bit about it because we're now, it was geopolitical and now it's Global Readiness, which includes world readiness and language in addition to the geopolitical policy. And so I was listening this morning and thinking about what I could offer you, and as many different businesses as we're in this room, from the hotel business to science to leadership, coaching, technology. So we have many differences, and yet there's a lot of commonality and some common threads here from what is the definition of localization. I think that that's a fair question to put on the table, and we may have different definitions in different contexts. How do I make a business case for localization, either with my management, with my peers, with my partner teams? And how do I take something global and make it local? And so I kind of want to blend some of that thinking into a topic, Mind the Gap, and how to grow a digital garden, or how to be thinking about growing a digital garden in the context of where that gap is for you in your business. So global readiness, as I mentioned, is in our company. It started with a geopolitical policy, which was really focused on, in the beginning, cartography, so maps and making sure that we were getting things right within the borders of a country in the right language. We also take care of internationalization, so I'll throw tons of terminology out here: globalization, localizability, marketization, things like regional formats and settings, calendars, time zones, currencies, just all of that stuff, and language, and really thinking about how to enable the right language or languages for the right market or markets. And that's really what I want to talk about here today, because there's a lot of complexity therein. And so it's really essentially people, places, and things, representations of people. So, how I'm dressed here today would not be appropriate in many contexts in different parts of the world. And proximity to people. So if you have photographs of people, you've got a lot of things to think about: hand gestures. Locations, so landmarks. So if you have a photograph of a person in front of a landmark, is the landmark sensitive? And things, everyday objects can take on different contexts depending on where you are in the world. So really thinking through the people, the places, and the things that you want to represent in your business, and what are the contexts. So any gardeners here? I would love to be. I'm really trying to learn. So far, not so good. But really, how does your garden grow? You take seeds and you start them, or you take starter plants and you put them somewhere in the ground or in a container. You've got to figure out what nourishment to give, what climate, what environment are they going to grow best in, how do you take care of them, all of those considerations. And then you may transplant those plants as they mature into an environment where they need to then also sustain. And so really thinking about how to grow your garden. Let's take one specific scenario, a rooftop garden. And so there you add in complexities such as, is the rooftop secure for people to be up there working on the garden? And you might want to hire in a contractor, a consultant, to come in and advise you on what kinds of plants would do well with the wind or the lack of wind, the sun, all of those different environmental factors. And so, really thinking about what you want to nurture in place and where those things may then go to further grow. Believe me, I'll try to tie this all in together. And where they grow out in the world, really it can be unique. So thinking about where each of us come from, where we are today, where we may go tomorrow, and how we see that world really depends upon our own unique perspective. I talk about the work that we do in our company. It's really the topic of people's passions. It can be your religious or political preferences, your gender, your family, your language. Language is inherently a part of who we are in our culture. And as the cartographer on my team would tell me, this is not an upside down map. This is actually a south side up map. And then he would go into further details about Mercator and things that I really cannot speak of. So, but this is all very important because I think that, and from what I've heard in the discussion this morning, some of what you're considering have global considerations. And so if you were on the call a few weeks ago, I spent most of my chatting time on this concept, which is if you're going to put something out into the world that's global in nature, which if you're going to localize, you got to be global first, it's kind of net neutral in a way. You want it to be as applicable, as appropriate, and as relevant as it could possibly be anywhere, at any time, for anyone. Really kind of generic. The main gotcha here is you don't want to be offensive. You can be very unintentionally offensive and not even know it. There's plenty of examples we wouldn't have time for today, but the whole blenders session at the Brand to Global last year is time spent talking on all the mistakes that we all make, not realizing that we're being unintentionally offensive or inappropriate. Then there's local considerations. In a way, it's kind of the easiest to get right because it's within the borders. It's the days of packaged product in my world. You know where you're going, into which location, which language or languages are relevant, and how to get it right in both imagery, in words. So as long as you do get it right, it's a fairly contained experience. But just when you get it right, it's now mobile. There's probably not a person here or on the line who doesn't have one of these devices with them in all form factors, shapes, sizes. And it probably works okay for you here, but if you travel outside of our borders, your borders, it may not work as well. And you may be okay with that and have a higher tolerance for it, but I think the time is rapidly coming where we need to really be considerate of that mobile experience and how what you're putting out into the world may need to land in a new environment, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Then you add in agility. Mobility and agility. We carry these things with us. And we really need to think about sort of that dynamic experience. You travel to Japan on business and you want to go to dinner. So you want to read it in English or French or whatever your language of preference is. And can you do that? And can you get to where you want to go? Is the map enabled? So I really think you need to think about these more, where in the world is Waldo, if you will, which he's right there. He's actually on that van. And this is what we tell our kids: never get into a van with Waldo on it. That's just not a good idea. So it's a new era, and it adds a new complexity. So we've talked around this a little bit already today, but really thinking about how do you understand who your customer is, who your customers are. And you kind of have to test your assumptions today as well. You need to know, where they are in the world, what language or languages, what their culture is, and where they may travel to. It's all of this data, but you can't stop there. You have to go another level deeper and test your assumptions. For example, where do you think this photograph was taken? Colombia?
Oh, no.
Close.
Chinatown Street.
It's in Vancouver, BC. And actually, I was at Loc World and had a conversation with a gentleman who followed up with me later and just said, do you know that we have 70% in BC, a 70% population of Chinese speakers? And really, we should be thinking about because we all know we're going to go into Canada, you want to localize into French, have English and French parity. But what if you add in, Chinese parity for certain locations? That's where your data and sort of the Internet of Things really can come into play. Taking this into more of a marketing context, I'm reading a book right now called it's the Language of Food, A Linguist Reads the Menu. And I'm only just starting it, but it's really interesting. It talks about, where does ketchup come from? And so it's talking about how restaurants may hire a linguist to write their menus. So this is where that cross-discipline thing comes into play when you think about your students. They may end up having a passion for food, and writing menus in different languages. But they really go in and study data and find out, where are the restaurants, where are people living, how do we market to them? Are there language and different choices of words we could use to be more relevant or to be more, provocative, a sexy menu kind of thing. So really kind of test your assumptions again and use that data to back you up. David Crystal, who's a famous linguist, said multilingualism promotes a climate of mutual respect. And I think that if nothing else with marketing, being respectful is, even when you're being provocative, I think there's a way to be respectful and using language. Multiculturalism is another consideration. Clearly, I'm not hiding where these photographs were taken. And I'm wondering if you can actually name some of those festivals that occur here in Washington, D.C. That's all you got? Chinese New Year. Yep, Cinco de Mayo, St. Patrick's Day. I think there's an Oktoberfest in there. Cambodian Community Day Festival and Scottish Games and Turkish Festival and Italian Festival. All happening here in Washington, D.C. So even if we're in an English-speaking, primarily based metropolitan, cosmopolitan city, multiculturalism and multilingualism surrounds us. You want to consider that as well in your marketing. And the city that never sleeps. One belongs to New York instantly as much as 5 minutes as in 5 years. And why is that? So I think, that sort of studying the data part of it, 350,000 tweets sent per minute. If you go to this tweet-o-meter, we could actually kind of check it out for a second and just sort of see where the tweets are coming from. This from the non-social media. Tweet-o-meter. And so, have you seen this Languages of New York? Have you seen the Languages of London? There are two versions of this, the Languages of London and the Languages of New York. And basically these guys got together and studied data between January 2010 and February 2013. They studied 8.5 million tweets in New York City, and they did the same in London. And of those 8.5 million, 8 million were in English. But when you look at the rest of those languages, Portuguese, Japanese, Russian, Korean, French, Turkish, and so on, and you start to study, what parts of the city are they coming from, and then you also note things like multilingualism, skyrockets, Liberty Island, Ellis Island, near the airport. So it kind of gives you another use, again, kind of plugging that big data, the Internet of Things, really thinking about in your marketing that test your assumptions. It's not always who and what and where you think it is to do something more targeted, if that's in your best interest to do so. Anyone know where this is?
A green Willy Wonka, right?
Yeah. What was the guess? No?
London?
Yes. London. So Selfridges is a department store that was originally built in 1909. It had a rooftop garden. So now I'm back to the garden. We're growing our garden. Has had a rooftop garden. It actually had an all-girls gun club. I think that's pretty cool and retro, and for the early 1900s. People will go up there and have cocktails and eat and enjoy the gardens. Beautiful. And then it was destroyed, had 3 separate incidents of bombing during World War II. They put the garden back up in 2009. In 2011, this is an art installation that Truvia put up for stevia, the artificial sweetener. That's plants. And so they did this whole, and so talk about minding the gap. That is a gap you don't want to miss, right? Is rowing your boat off the edge of this building. And so, again, it really comes to thinking about the environment, thinking about what you're trying to grow. What seeds are you going to plant? And is the wind going to be a factor up here? Do I need to bring in a consultant? There's a plug for you, Andrew, to help me think about my business. And so I just think all of this ties kind of nicely together. And, again, another very multilingual, multicultural city where you'd think, well, they speak English, right? And yes, while that is true, there is also the summer that this art installation went up, they did another study. Some guys did a study, or gals. They studied 3.3 million tweets in that summer to come up with 66 languages, I think it was. Did I get that right? Yeah, 3.3 million tweets in 66 languages in the summer that this art installation went up in 2011. So, not that you're going to put 66 languages out there necessarily, but it's just an interesting data point. I mean, I think my whole point here is to kind of get us to think about globalization, localization, whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, I feel that, and we struggle with the same things. No matter I work at a big company, we struggle with the same things, which is really, if you plant the right seeds to grow your digital garden, you're really building this multicultural, multilingual capability, this muscle, and it's an investment. I think it's about flipping the bit and flipping the conversation from a spend of dollars to get something that was built here, put in those different languages, that just needs to happen, into this is an investment. I've got data to back it up to tell you that we're going to invest in these markets, we're going to invest in these languages. These languages can be anywhere. They can be in our own backyard. And I really think that is the key. That's the Uber, in my opinion, of where we're headed with language. So that's what I've got for you. And happy to take questions. 3 minutes.